such a genuine gem, thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is the solved case of Israel Keyes. He was thought to be the most diabolical serial killer. Now, this is one that really confuses me because most serial killers, especially ones that are so disturbing, are widely talked about. But in this case, Israel not only stumped, but also scared the FBI themselves, and yet he is pretty much unknown. Now, that is not the reason I'm talking about him today. If any of you know me and my channel, I do not like to glamorize the killers. I like to talk about the facts of the case in order to get into the psychology of a killer's mind, but more importantly, I like to talk about the victims and shed light on their stories, and that is why I do these cases. If that's something that interests you, I would really appreciate your support. All you have to do is subscribe down below and make sure to give this a thumbs up and leave a nice comment down below. I also want to say I am so thankful to today's sponsor, Hunt a Killer. Now, they are a mystery subscription box, which is fictional, of course, where you basically get to play detective, where you can actually solve a crime and find a killer. Now, this is perfect if you are an empath like me or just highly emotional, because it kind of has less guilt to it knowing that there is no one in danger, that you are not really in charge of a real crime, that this is fictional. You can have a peace of mind while doing it. That is just a fun game that feels real. When I was a kid, I was constantly creating my own spy missions and creating like little pieces to find throughout my house and basically making one of these boxes by myself, and it was so incredibly hard. Plus, I already knew what was going to happen because I created it, but now these boxes literally have all of that for you: documents, case files, evidence, all wrapped up in boxes that are sent to you monthly. So you get bits of information every month and you have no idea what's going to happen, what the truth is. That's what you have to figure out. So do you think you're up for it? Now, what I love most about all of this is that although their crimes are fictional that they are dealing with, they actually send some of their proceeds to the Cold Case Foundation in order to help solve real cold cases. And it's something that I think all of you would enjoy as well, which is why I'm sharing it with you today. Now, I do have a 20% off code. It is at huntakiller.com and the discount code is Brooke. So your first box is 20% off with the discount code Brooke. So thank you, Hunt a Killer, for sponsoring this portion of the video, and now let's get back to this story. So it was 2011 in Vermont, and the Currier family lived in Essex. Now, this was Bill and Lorraine Currier, and they were a beautiful older couple. Lorraine was 55, Bill was 50, and they lived a pretty quiet life with their pets and just loved to be homebodies. They didn't really leave their house that often. They kind of kept to themselves, but they were always kind to the neighbors. It wasn't like they were, angry at people, or if they had to come in contact with people. They really were just the perfect balance of kind and introverted, and they were known to be friendly and pleasant and peaceful, and that's how they kept their home as well. But unfortunately, on June 8th, that peace would be disrupted and they would disappear. Their privacy would be completely ripped away from them. They would completely vanish, and the only thing left that could tell investigators what happened was that there was a phone cord that had been cut and the home had been broken into. However, no matter how much they searched, this couple was not found, and neither was their abductor. Fast forward to February of 2012, 8 months later in Anchorage, Alaska. Now, this will all make sense in a little bit, but just stay with me here. The first of the month, 18-year-old Samantha Koenig was working at a coffee shop, which was just a tiny little shop that was kind of sitting on the corner, kind of the equivalent of how we have the snow cones here in the United States. We just have little kind of booths set up where people can drive up and then walk up to the little station and order. And this is what this coffee place was. And so it was a pretty tiny area, and Samantha was working there alone because it was so small, and there were also security cameras, so it was pretty safe, and they felt like the employees could do it just one at a time. It was also about 5 p.m., so not a ton of people would be going to get coffee at this time. Samantha was doing just fine, filling all the customers' orders. Her boyfriend was going to pick her up later that evening, and everything was wonderful. But then a customer would walk up, they would order a drink, and Samantha would be making it. However, when she would turn around, she would see a gun pointed at her. Now, Samantha, in the footage that is out for the internet that I will hopefully place right now, you can see her kind of put her hands up and back away. And at this point, she kind of is forced to sit on the ground, and then she kind of runs to go turn the light off in the coffee shop as though she'd been told to, and then she sits down again, and then this person who is masked and in a hoodie comes into the coffee shop, like jumps through the window to her. Now the cash register would then be emptied. Samantha would grab her coat, and this man would drag her out of the coffee shop, and then there is security footage in the parking lot where you can also see her being dragged through the actual lot. And this man that was with her couldn't be identified, and before anyone even knew what had happened to Samantha, she was actually sending text messages to people. And this text message would go to her boss, where she would say that she didn't feel good, that she was having a bad day, so she went ahead and closed up, and she was actually going out of town for a while. Of course, her boss couldn't yet see the surveillance tape, so he didn't know what was actually happening. And that is when her boyfriend would go and pick her up, or try to, and nobody was there, and they immediately called the police, but there was literally no sign of Samantha anywhere until 2 weeks later, when her family would get a text message from her phone, and it was a ransom, or what was going to be a ransom. It was actually an address to a park that said where to go and what to look for. And when they got there, they found a photo of Samantha holding up a newspaper from a few days prior, showing that she was still alive, and then on the back, it demanded $30,000. This abductor wanted the ransom to be put into Samantha's account. The note was typed so nobody could really be linked back to it, and the family was not well off and had to get the help of the community to even raise $30,000, and they did so. And they also had the involvement of all of the police at this time, so they put the $30,000 in her bank account, but they were also going to track it. A few weeks after it was deposited, it was actually pinged to be in Arizona, and then on March 8th, it was in New Mexico that this abductor was getting money out of her account. But in all of the footage of where he was actually picking up the money, he was masked, and they couldn't identify him there either. He not only had a mask, he had glasses on, and he also had several layers of clothing, kind of to make his size different than what he actually was. But there's one thing that he was not covering, and that was his vehicle, which both times was a 2012 white Ford Focus. And that is when they put an APB out on this car, so anybody anywhere in the United States could locate it and send it in to investigators if they had seen this car to hopefully catch this man. 5 days later, it would be spotted in Texas, and they would just kind of stake out. It was at a motel that this car had been parked, and they would just kind of stake out waiting for the man to come out. And that is when a white man of average height and brown hair would walk out to this vehicle, and the cop that was trailing him would continue to follow him before pulling him over and asking for his ID. And that is when they would know the name of Samantha's possible abductor. Now, this was a month after Samantha had been abducted, but now they knew his name was Israel Keyes. Not only did they find this man, they also found evidence in his car, because he had Samantha's credit card as well as a mask, her cell phone, a gun, and a dye pack from a bank robbery. The problem was Samantha wasn't in the car, and they didn't know where she was. Israel wasn't talking. They extradited him back to Alaska and began to question him, and they searched his home. They found several different articles he had on his computer about Samantha's disappearance, but they didn't find her. And that is when, for a month straight, he would be questioned, but then he would confess to her abduction. Unfortunately, that's when he would confess to her murder as well. Israel Keyes said that he walked up to that drive-through window at the coffee shop with the intent to kill Samantha, that he got through the window, told her to turn off the lights, and then zip-tied her within seconds, and he drug her through the parking lot where she actually escaped at one point. She was a fighter, and she was gonna get away, but unfortunately Israel was just too fast and tackled her to the ground, put her in his car, and that is when he started driving her through town. And he told her that he just was going to get a ransom from her family, and she started saying, my family doesn't have a ton of money, you're not going to get a ton of money from them. But he didn't seem to care, because that was a lie. He didn't want her just for a ransom. That's when he took her back to his home and he tied her up in the shed. This was a home that he shared with his girlfriend and either a 7 or 8-year-old daughter. Now, that is when he started texting Samantha's family and friends saying that she was okay, to buy him some more time. He also asked her for her card number, her PIN number. However, she informed him that her card was at her house. Samantha was left tied up in the shed with the radio blaring so nobody could hear her screams. And that is when Israel would go to her house and sneak in to get her card. However, her boyfriend actually caught him and kind of ran out after him, but he got away and the boyfriend couldn't do anything further. He didn't know who this man was. And that is when Israel would go back to the shed and he would sexually assault Samantha and strangle her to death. At this point, he didn't dispose of the body. In fact, he had other plans, because he had a 2-week cruise already planned with his wife and with his girlfriend and his daughter, and he was going to go on that and leave her there. This would be 2 weeks long, and when he returned, he would finally contact Samantha's family once again, who hadn't heard anything from her, and that is when he would prop up her deceased body, sew her eyelids open, and take a picture of her holding the newspaper. He sent a picture of Samantha, who was already deceased, to her family, and that is when he would dismember her body and dispose of her in Mantesuka Lake. After his confession, he was charged with murder and his trial was set for March 2013. However, Israel wasn't done talking, because this wasn't his only murder. There had been many, many more. However, he wasn't going to just spit it all out. He was only going to allude to them, give them bits of information. He was interviewed for more than 40 hours and he would give pieces, but not enough that investigators could really put much together. I mean, he seemed like he really loved that he could kind of hold this over their heads, keep investigators on their toes. He even started to say that you can interview people who are in my life, but nobody really knows me. They will only give you incorrect information, because I have always been two people. He said the only person who really knew him was him. And they asked him, how long have you been two people? And he said, 14 years. Now, he also would allude to the fact that his usual MO wasn't what he did with Samantha. In fact, we'd find out later on, Samantha's case is extremely different than the rest of them. And he was saying that they didn't actually know much at all and that he had so much more to tell them. That is when he finally said something that would give the investigators a one-up on him, and that was that he had a daughter and he didn't want the news of what he had done reaching her. So investigators jumped on this and said, look, we can keep it out of the media as much as possible. However, you have to talk. And so that's actually when he decided to. Finally, he would. Israel went all the way back to his first crime, which was between 1996 and 1998. He couldn't remember exactly when. He said he was out on a lake in Oregon and there was a group of girls and he had gotten one of them away from her friends where he sexually assaulted her, and he didn't kill her, but he had wanted to, but instead he let her go. That was when he actually went into the military until 2001 when he was honorably discharged, and this is when he began to really kill. He began to create kill kits, which is something that I don't think any other serial killer has really done, especially not in the way that Israel did it. You see, he would get buckets from Home Depot and he would stash everything he would need for a murder, guns, ammunition, just any supplies he would need, and he would stash them in different locations across the country, nowhere in particular, just wherever he felt. He would stash them, and this is because he didn't have a time limit, or he didn't have a certain victim he was going after. It was just whenever he wanted to go and get this kill kit at a certain area, he would then go and find whoever fell into his trap, whoever was nearby, and kill them. That's how he would decide his victims. It wasn't, a 5'7" blonde. It wasn't women with hair parted down the middle. It wasn't a certain race. It was literally just whoever was there. And Israel would he was so methodical about how he did things. He would go and he would get on a flight from his hometown to another place, but that wouldn't be where he killed. He would then rent a car. He would drive thousands of miles to a different kill kit. He would kill there, drive thousands of miles back, and take the plane from there. He knew how to make sure his steps could not be retraced, and it made it impossible for him to be implemented in these crimes. The only things he wouldn't do is commit a murder near his own home or kill children or dogs. However, other animals and all other humans were what he would go for. He didn't care. Now, the info of his actual crimes that he would confess to, the investigators would put together, was extremely hard to find. However, the True Crime All the Time podcast did a wonderful job with this. I will link them down below, and they really helped out a lot in my research during this part, especially. But it was said that when he got out of the military in 2001, he was in Neabay, Washington, when he would commit his first murder. Now, that was anywhere between July and October when he said he killed a couple. However, he didn't know their names, if they lived there. He knew no information about them, or so he said. He said he buried them near a valley, and then in 2005 or 2006 he killed another couple, but they weren't actually together, they were separate, but he disposed of both of their bodies in the Crescent Lake. Now, in all of these cases, he would say that he would move the victims' cars around so it would throw off investigators as to where they had gone or where they were, and this worked because these victims would never be found. Then by 2007 to 2008, Israel was found through flying records to be traveling all the way around, which is what he did when he wanted to kill, but he didn't talk about murdering anyone else. However, this didn't mean that he didn't. In 2009, on the East Coast, he said he kidnapped and buried a woman in New York, but he didn't say her name. He said he didn't know it. And through all of this traveling, he said he only ever used cash, and how he would get that cash was robbing banks as he went. So not only was he murdering, but he was also robbing banks, and he was getting away with both. The next few years, he was still traveling. However, he refused to talk about what he did while he was traveling, if there were more victims. But then in 2011, he said that he was at a park and he almost killed a couple, but two officers actually drove up at that very time, and he decided not to. When one pulled up, he said he could still go through with it, but when two did, he left. And next month, June 8th, 2011, he would fly to Chicago, where he would then drive to Essex, Vermont. And he was looking for a house off the beaten path with a ranch-style home that he knew the layout of, which with a garage attached, no cars in the driveway, no sign of children or dogs. And he had brought a gun or a silencer, but he had also stopped in Burlington on his journey where he had a kill kit, and he picked that up as well. This kill kit had zip ties, ammunition, guns, Drano, duct tape, and he would continue to drive to find the perfect victims. And that is when he would come to the Currier house in Vermont a little after midnight, and he would cut their phone lines. Cutting their phone lines wasn't to make sure they couldn't call 911. This was actually to make sure that they didn't have a security system. And that is when he would break into their garage. He would head to their bedrooms and he would stand over them with a gun. And that is when they would wake up to see him in their house. When Bill and Lorraine woke up, he zip-tied them to the ground in seconds, and he started asking them about money, about guns, and they did what they were told. They told him about everything, and he took their guns and their money, and that is when he got them out to his car, or their car, drove them to an abandoned home or farm that he had already kind of sorted out and found before. And that is when he would take Bill in first, and he would actually tie him up in the basement of this home, leaving Lorraine in the car. And that is when she would actually escape, and he would come out to find no one in the car. But he did see her running to the road and got to her before she could. Israel said he drug her back to the house, tied her up to the bed, and that is when he went to check on Bill, who had then gotten loose from the stool that he was tied to. And Israel said he got really angry because he had a specific way he wanted to do things and they were ruining it. And that he kind of lost control on Bill at this point and began to beat him with a shovel. He then shot Bill several times. He went back up to Lorraine, cut off her clothes with a knife, and sexually assaulted her twice before taking her down to the basement to make her look at her deceased husband. He then sat Lorraine down and strangled her from behind with a rope. He then said he put them in the corner of this building, poured Drano over them, covered them in debris, and left them behind. Now, the building that he confessed to leave them in was actually thought to be demolished, and they were never found. However, the people who demolished the building were talked to and said that they had kind of smelt a decaying smell, and they just thought it was some sort of animal, but they didn't check. Now, he also said he threw out the gun in a nearby lake, and this was actually found. It was said, "It is clear from the facts of this case that though confronted with death, Bill and Lorraine showed extraordinary bravery and extreme dedication and love for one another. They fought to the end." Now, like I said, Israel was not really talking. He didn't want to say many of his victims, and he especially didn't want to name them. However, they began to bring in missing persons photos from around where they were finding his kill kits. And there was one that a woman who had gone missing near his kill kit in New Jersey named Deborah Feldman. When they brought in her picture, there was a sense of recognition that crossed Israel's face. And Deborah had had a really rough life. She had fallen into addiction, and she had started being a sex worker because of her addiction. She was homeless. She was unfortunately an easy target. And she was last seen April 8th of 2009 walking the streets. Now, Israel never admitted to having anything to do with her death, but it was theorized that he possibly picked her up while she was walking the streets, offered her to be paid, and instead killed her and disposed of the body. Her body was never found either. They thought that it was possibly disposed in Tapa Lake nearby, but Israel said he didn't want to talk about it yet, so they couldn't get anything out of him. Now, he refused to say anything more about victims, so at this point, there were only 4 victims that he had confessed to, And he was saying there were so many more. He was alluding to the fact that there could be up to 36. He even talked about one woman saying that he had killed her but made it look like an accident, and the police had actually recovered her body and thought it was an accident and ruled it that way. But he knew that he had murdered her and gotten away with it. So what made this man the monster that he was? Looking into his past, there was nothing odd, nothing traumatic. We like to say that is what makes killers. I don't necessarily believe that all the time, but in this case, there definitely wasn't really anything, at least that we know of. I mean, he even said himself that he had a pretty normal childhood. He was born in Utah in 1978. He was homeschooled with his 10 siblings. He had a pretty normal upbringing, except for the fact that he said he had some emotional issues, but didn't really elaborate on what those were. The only disturbing thing that you can find a correlation to his past is that at one point his family lived next to Chevy Kehoe, who would be convicted of murdering 3 people in 1996. This was thought to be around the same time that Israel assaulted for the first time. Could this be a coincidence? Did he realize what his neighbor had done and he was friends with him and decided to try it out for himself? Was this a correlation at all? He was also said to start killing cats during this time as well. He was also said to be a part of a church that had very racist views at this time, and it was said that this could have made him a hateful person. However, his victims didn't necessarily have, a specific MO as far as someone he was personally attacking or a type of person. In 1998, he joined the U.S. Army and was given several different awards for achievements, and everyone who knew him said he was quiet, kind of kept to himself, and he was honorably discharged. He started living in the woods after that. He was alone, he was on boats. And that is when in 2007 he would actually start a construction business where he moved in Alaska. And this was going well. He would travel in his free time around the world. And what people didn't know was that he was also murdering innocent people. Everything in Israel's life he did on a schedule. He didn't do anything without a plan, and he refused to let that plan go any other way. Every time he went on a trip, he took the battery out of his phone so it couldn't be tracked. He only paid in cash. He would drive thousands of miles out of his way to not be caught, and he had it so methodically planned out. Now, he said that a huge inspiration for him of sorts was Ted Bundy, and that he read up on him. He watched a lot of stuff about him, and he also always zip-tied and gagged his victims. Now, you can actually watch 6 hours worth of interviews on YouTube. I'll link that down below too, and from that you can really get a sense of who Israel was as a person, what his mind was like. And this killer is extremely cold and calculated, but it wasn't like he was angry or he did it out of hatred. It was almost like he simply just enjoyed killing and wanted to keep doing it, but almost like he had an addiction to it as well. Not only did he want to be the kind of killer that nobody could figure out, but he had succeeded in that. He had a different MO in every case, making it impossible to connect these victims and the possible missing persons cases. I mean, he didn't care who the victims were, just that he had killed them. He knew exactly how to get away. He was extremely smart, and he used his brilliance to be a monster. The scariest part to me was that even the FBI said that they didn't think he was crazy. And I believe that he just wanted to be in charge, that he was obsessed with that control. And you can really see it in the way that he talks about the media. He did not want anybody talking about him, what he had done, his case, because he couldn't control what they were saying. He could control what he was telling investigators, but not what they were saying about him. Now, he said that people who loved true crime in the media who spoke about it, that we were all stupid, and that he truly hated all of us and didn't want anybody talking about him in that way.
My concern, the problem is nowadays, the more stuff my name is attached to, the more likely it is that somebody's going to try to do some kind of stupid freaking TV special, or, you know how it is nowadays, like all this true crime that people are obsessed with, and that's
Although, could this have been a way for him to manipulate everybody and say, I don't want all this attention, so more people actually wanted to talk about him because of that? That could definitely be the case. I mean, he seemed to really be a master manipulator that kind of played life like a game, which is something that a sociopath does love to do. If you are even a part of their chessboard, anywhere near them, they use you exactly how they want to. And when you no longer have a place in their game, if you know how they are, they will get rid of you. He would tease investigators saying, did you find the knives in New York? Or how deep is this certain body of water? But he wouldn't elaborate on why he was saying these things or if they connected, and he wouldn't say any more. So investigators spent so much time searching for these little bits of information he was giving them without knowing if they even mattered. Now, some say Israel saying that he was two different types of people means that he could have been crazy and that people were mistaken about that. However, this could also be a sign of compartmentalization, which is where your brain kind of can store things in the back of your mind, so you are not constantly thinking about it, or it's not weighing on you, or it's not who you are to everybody. In the way of Israel, it's kind of how he could appear normal and get away with it for so long, because he put that part of himself away and he hid it from everybody. And I think that that is kind of what he did. This murderous part of him was hidden in the back of his mind, because he appeared to be extremely level-headed and he was knowledgeable about everything, and he seemed to have an addiction to murder, which is kind of, you can say all serial killers do, but it's kind of different in a way in Israel's case. And I'm not sure if you kind of pick up on this or understand, but when I was researching, it kind of appeared that he was doing it as a part of a routine rather than it being something that, he had like an urge to do. That, some killers have that routine where they're like every 2 days they feel this urge where they need to kill again. It almost seemed like to him, he had the routine because he needed that structure rather than he needed to kill, if that makes any sense. And another thing that kind of separated him from normal serial killers is that he didn't even remember some of his victims, or so he said so. And this could be, if he was telling the truth, a part of the compartmentalization, because it was in another part of his brain where he couldn't reach it. He didn't remember them. He didn't want to keep trophies of them, which just, some killers don't, but a lot of them do, or they at least remember who they are. I mean, he was so detached from what he had done and even what it meant and his emotions, but it wasn't like when he was on his other side, his other personality, that he was regretful for what he had done. Like if he was schizophrenic and if he had another voice that told him to kill and one that didn't, it wasn't like that in any way. It was zero remorse in either way he was. I mean, he stated that it wasn't a big deal. He even said, a lot of people ask why, and I would be like, why not?
I almost feel guilty. Costing the taxpayers a lot of money. But just kept my mouth shut.
He loved studying other serial killers' methods, and he said he did this because he liked it. He liked the adrenaline, the excitement of it, and that was it. What baffles me the most is how different his murder and abduction of Samantha was. He was in his hometown, which he swore to never do. He also had not planned anything out in the slightest. It was kind of like a spur-of-the-moment decision, which he also never did. He was also so frantic and frazzled the entire time, and he just seemed like he had snapped, like he had had a mental breakdown or something that caused him to do this so spur of the moment, which ultimately is what got him caught. Was he done killing and wanted to be caught from it, which I don't really see happening? Was he getting cocky? Did he think that he could get away with anything? I also can't see that, because if he was so methodical and almost seemed to have that routine mindset where he had to do certain things, if he had that ingrained in his brain, he wouldn't be able to stray away from it. And so it really leads me to question, what about Samantha was different? But Israel, during all this questioning, continued to say he wanted the death penalty and said that if he was dead, they wouldn't have a case. He was threatening investigators with this, and it was true. If he was dead, they wouldn't be able to pursue a guilty verdict. And this would lead to Israel Keyes actually taking his own life on December 2nd, 2012 by cutting his wrist and hanging himself in his jail cell. Now, a 4-page suicide note was found under his body, but it was actually covered in blood and they couldn't read it, so they sent it to Quantico to analyze it, and what they found was that it was basically just all about him. It said nothing about victims. It wasn't a confession of any sort, and so I'm not even going to get into that because it's not about the victims. Investigators say that Israel was the most diabolical killer they have ever had to deal with, and yet he's not widely talked about. Why is that? Not saying that he deserves to, but his victims sure do, and I just think that that's quite strange that we have overlooked someone who is so odd, but I think that could be the case. We don't like when we don't know why they kill, and that some people just kill because they want to. And I think that's why nobody talks about it, because it's frustrating, and it is. And I'm sure the families of these victims feel the same exact way. But also, why did Israel take his life? Was he done talking to investigators? Did he want to make sure the victims couldn't get justice? Overall, this case just frustrates me so incredibly, and I'm glad I get to share the victim stories, but the fact that I give Israel any spotlight kind of makes me just feel icky. So yeah, if you could leave some nice comments about the victims or to their families down below, that would really make me feel better about doing cases like this. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.